So just so everybody knows, obviously the meeting is being recorded. I'm Mark Betancourt, Chairman. So I'll call the meeting to order, and we'll note at the moment a quorum is present. Online, I do have committee member Christine DeStasio. She's the only member not here that's online. I also have Joe DeLucia, Greg Carabine, Pete Gualtieri. I'm losing my mind. Pete Gauthier, Mark Koulos, Greg Balassi. I said Greg already. All right, so I got everybody's names. Gotta stop. Oh, I was gonna say a bad joke. Hang on. Missed myself here. All right, so we do have minutes from the previous meeting, which was Tuesday, May 17th. Who was that? By Pete. Second by Mark Koulos. Any additions, corrections, deletions to the minutes?
Couple corrections.
Go ahead.
The first paragraph on page 2, I think you need to add Golden Street into new sites. I have to tell you, I was on the Zoom call. The third paragraph down, Greg, I think you talked about the wetland, again, probably not being, most likely not an issue based on your investigation. But we just add in. On page 3, third paragraph down, talking about the potential for a Franklin Street site. It says discussing 3-floor school with a field. I don't think there's any discussion of the field. Talk about having it on the roof. Christine, on the fifth paragraph down, concerns with busing students. I think you talked about veterans. I've been wrong there, but I thought you specifically were concerned with veterans on that.
Yeah.
And then on page 4, discussion and action on the report is needed. The second paragraph. Not exactly how this went down, but a motion was offered for the 4 schools, for 3 schools and 4 schools. Excuse me. Motion was made 4 schools, and there was discussion and an effort made to make it 4 and 3. And
that didn't go over.
Just mention the fact that that discussion was going. And then for future meeting schedule, very last sentence, another public information session to be held on June 21st after presented to the regular council. I think we should just change that to the public session will be held after the regular council.
Well, I mean, that's basically what happened. What's in there, I think, accurately reflects what was discussed, but then plans changed after that. So I believe it does anyway. So, but
should I take out the date or just?
No, you can leave it, but we changed it afterwards. That's all. You know, so you can say that as a matter of record that at the Board of Ed meeting that day we made some changes. You know, I, as chairman, made changes to the meeting schedule because of some, there was some conflict. Misunderstanding. No, thank you. All right. Any other additions, corrections, deletions? Here are none. I'll make a note that the meeting is again being recorded, and because we're doing it as a hybrid, votes will be taken in roll call. So I'll start with on the motion to approve the minutes as amended. Christine DeStasio.
Yes.
Thank you. Joe.
Yes.
Pete. Mark.
Yes.
Greg.
Yes.
Second Greg. Senior Greg. That's it. And I vote also in the affirmative. The motion carries unanimously. All right. Back to the agenda. Greg Smalley. It's your show. You good? All right, there we go.
So you are seeing slideshow. And this is a carryover from our last meeting, and we'll continue on. So some of this might seem repetitive. We've been refining it and pulling it together, and I will let Jim Barrett will take the first part of this and lead us through.
Good evening, Jim Barrett with DRA Architects, and if we go to the first slide.
Not want to advance. Hang on a second.
Using
Well, I can describe the image in great detail. Get us right past it.
Right, the last time we did this.
Try to do something.
And all your up and downs and
Yeah.
forward and reverses.
It worked before we started too.
You have an IT guy.
Yeah.
Sorry for the delay, folks, but you don't know how good this is, because I always get, joked on by this guy about not being able to, get the technology to read, move forward.
Back as a dish served, well-served full.
All right, we're back to sharing.
All right. So the slide up above here shows really what we were brought into the community to help assess over the last about a year period. 14 buildings here within the district, and of those 14 buildings, 7 elementary and 2 middle schools, which really drew much of our focus. In terms of an agenda for this evening, as Greg indicated, some of this you'll see as repetitive. We wanted to break it down into 2 components. The first, conclusions from the work that we've done to date, and I'll manage that first section. And then the second, potential options, where Greg will speak to the various options explored, and then Mark Jeffco from ONG Industries will help us speak to dollar values as we see them. So focusing on the physical conditions of the buildings, you can see the same 14 buildings listed. The 3 captured at the top seen as most suitable as they stand for the tests that are assigned to them. The grouping in the center seen as suitable, and then those Waconic and Stanton identified as less suitable at the bottom of the screen. As we think about the demographics for the community and think about where it's heading, it's a pretty static profile as we look forward, and that's as we look at census information for the city as projected. Similarly, as we look at the pre-K to 5 total enrollments, the bars shown in green are those that are historical. Those in blue are projections. As we stand today and look forward, our demographer tells us it's a relatively static environment as well. And then if we move on and consider the 6-8 enrollment, it similarly is a relatively static profile, meaning that from that aspect of consideration, it's a pretty straightforward assessment in terms of what we have to address in terms of size and number relative to the enrollment projections. What we have up behind me right now, these are the attendance zones and the current elementary school catchment areas. A couple that I'd like to draw your attention to in the pink, I'll start there. Stanton, which is in the zone where the cursor is, has a satellite catchment area. And similarly, as we look to Uncas in the green, it has 2 satellite elements that it draws its students from. Two that I'd also like to draw your attention to on the western side, the Huntington Elementary School basically travels nearly the length from the northern border down to the center of town. And similarly, to the right of that, the Moriarty Elementary catchment area has a very long vertical axis in terms of its catchment areas. This shows the intensity of students and where they're located. This represents density zones, and you can see them to the east and towards the center of the community. And these represent some of the highest areas of enrollments, both current and projected. And these are in areas where we expect the long-term use of those areas to be consistent. So once again, a relatively static profile. In terms of thinking of parity in the system, and that's one of the drivers, we're heading somewhat in the wrong direction when you consider that the bigs, if you will, the largest of the elementary schools, those in yellow, Stanton and Moriarty, those largest schools as elementary schools are getting larger. And relative to the smallest elementary schools in the system, if we look to the bottom, Veterans and Waconic, those are heading in the opposite direction. So the bigs are getting bigger, the smalls are getting smaller. And really what we'd like to try to find is more equity or parity across the system. So as we look at ideas of what should be incorporated as part of the work, it's to that point of a desire to better align enrollments across facilities. And some of them we find are too small at an elementary school level to be effective. Some of the bullet points listed here, some are not fiscally or logically feasible. Some do not help in terms of providing parity across the system. Buildings don't meet guidelines relative to state guideline standards. And then lastly, the projected enrollments will stretch some of these schools. So at one end of the spectrum, we have some schools that are inefficient from the standpoint of having too much area for the population served, and others that are going to be stretched to meet that need. If we think about fostering school growth, when we think about appropriate school sizings, certainly not more than 800 students for an elementary school level. Target range, 300 to 500 students, serving a balanced mix of students from within the community. And then as we think about these communities of learners, it's designing smaller learning environments within potentially larger facilities. So that can happen in several ways. Freestanding small schools, which is the approach taken today. And then two others which basically sound similar. Small schools within one building, they share the same administration, or schools within schools, where you basically have two operational entities under one roof. So this evening, we're going to share with you three approaches that were considered. The first is utilization of the existing configuration, and that is 7 schools at 300 students each. And this study is really looking at it from a standpoint of just maintenance, keeping up to pace with keeping the buildings open and operational. The alternate configurations, one, a 4-school system at 550 to 600 students, and then a 3-school configuration, potentially at 700 students. And I'd just like to draw to everybody's attention, our charge as given to us by the building committee was to look at the 4-school approach as we move forward.
That's kind of our background of all the research that was done to get us to where we were. And our most recent work is trying to build a correlation and a comparison between those options. So as Jim said, the first was to just look at maintaining what you have, which is frequently called do nothing. There is no do nothing. Buildings deteriorate, education moves forward. We call it do nothing because in essence, it doesn't anticipate building or enlarging anything. It's just taking care of what you own and addressing the needs, be it through neglect, underfunding, wear and tear. There's any number of reasons why buildings need work. And then in this case, you'd end up with 7 elementary schools, 2 middle schools. You would maintain the existing. You would not address the educational shortfalls. We're not talking about building a new 7-school district here with this option. And it wouldn't address all your code requirements because if you don't fully renovate the buildings, you don't need to address some of the inherent flaws that are in the current buildings. And that's in particular a building such as teachers and Waconic are the two that really fall into that category pretty firmly. So if we look at just working with those 7 buildings, you see that only 3 of them are large enough to even work to an OSCGR program. So if we were to take the most restrictive program that we would consider, only 3 of the buildings would fall into being large enough to work with that. We're building projected costs for repairs and maintenance off of the assessments that we did at the beginning of this effort. And so what we'll project forward has been done for each one of the buildings that we looked at. And we'll show you 2 separate buildings and then the district overall. These are not escalated numbers. These are today's numbers, but they forecast out over 20 years. And when Mark talks about the other options later, he'll talk about escalation. And we'll most probably take these numbers we're going to talk about tonight and escalate them out so we get more of an apples to apples comparison. So our first building we'll show tonight is Stanton. And we picked this building because it's one that a lot of people know. It's also in the area where it serves a good population. It's well positioned. So it would be an obvious candidate for the question of, do you renovate it and keep it as it is, or do you use the site for something different? So in here, we're looking at over the next 20 years, about a $16 million investment in today's dollars. And about 7.5 of that, 7.6 million, is forecast to be needed in the next 3 years. By 2025, you would have somewhere in excess of $7.5 million worth of work that we see as needed on that. And that's accounting for the paving and the boilers that were replaced and a bunch of other things that we know were done on that building. It's a building that has some pretty great needs, and you see even by 2030, you're still looking at another $3.6 million investment. So in the next 8 years, you're looking at north of almost $12 million to be invested in that building to keep it essentially functioning as it is now. We then, I think, picked Moriarty because it's a building that, once again, sits on a good location in the city. It's a good parcel. It's a building that kind of tempts you into thinking that you could work with it and perhaps do something to make the existing building work a little bit better. And there we're seeing by 2025 about a $5 million investment. And what in particular we're looking at on that building is some of the water infiltration in the walls and some of the places where we're starting to see efflorescence. And it looks like we're starting to perhaps worry a little bit about the envelope on that building. And then the 9.7 is taking care of systems and whatnot to keep the building up and functioning. But about 18.4 million over the next 20 years, technically 18 years the way this is forecast. We then, after doing that for all the buildings, put it together for the district as a whole. So this is all the buildings that we were asked to look at. And when you get out to 2035, Kelly starts to show up in these numbers because by that point you're getting out to a building that's 20-something years old, and you start to look at systems that need to be addressed. Non-escalated dollars, today's dollars, about $197 million to over 20 years to address the buildings, just the needs that you have. If you take Kelly out, because it's not an immediate need. You're still about 165 million. And that is looking between now and 2030, somewhere about $120 million in work that we say needs to be done. So in short, it doesn't include escalation. We can escalate these out for the city council meeting. Project start dates can change, but there's a pretty limited window. So the way to look at these is look at it in gaps of 5 years. So somewhere in the 5 years between 2025 and 2030, you would expect to incur all that cost. Most of that work would take place in occupied schools. It's not summer type work. It is pretty substantial work in a lot of places. And you'd be working in multiple schools at the same time. So you've got a logistical challenge when you take on trying to catch up on maintenance work and updating work across an entire district.
We wouldn't have any swing space to work with.
That's the big problem with that. Yeah, if you don't pick up swing space, and you also don't, precious little of this qualifies for grants. So you're essentially carrying that number in-house. And when we get to the end, and Mark's talking about the really, the true comparison of this, you start to see how that starts to work out. So that makes a good basis of comparison for us. Then we went to what we were calling new build options. And here we took the direction, as Jim said, of 4 schools as voted by the committee. And we ran 3 schools parallel to it to see if there was enough of a substantive difference to make it a subject from the idea of logistics, building, and money, not from the educational side or the operational side. So we programmed these out to have appropriately sized spaces. In other words, we went in excess of the OSCGR model program. Given a number of things we've learned in working with urban districts and the idea of having space for special ed in each one of the schools, so it's not concentrated in a particular area of the city or a particular school, building outdoor learning and play opportunities, which a lot of urban districts have a premium on, incorporating STEAM and project-based learning, and also trying to address the needs that were expressed by other city departments for fields and gymnasiums and that type of stuff. So we're a little bit over the OSCGR program size, but using that to develop a realistic building. The idea is that we want to accommodate flexibility learning going forward, so different pedagogies, different methodologies, and also use it as a start point for the planning process, so that we're not thinking later we should have built bigger, but we're thinking if we start here and we have to adjust a program, we have a starting point from which to move. So 3 school option is 3 new elementary schools, not 4. Of 700 students each, and 4 schools is 5 1/4. At that level, you get enough flexibility built into those buildings based on the program to accommodate a swing in population without having to look to modulars. You can also, at that point, if you're adding, we're seeing 3% growth as a total, or 300 students overall. If you were the 300 students on 2,100, it's about 1.5%. So if you added 1.5% to this, you'd add about 20 students. So your impact on that is pretty slim. We think there's plenty of space there. This is what I was talking about on comparison of the programs. For 700 students, OSCGR has you at 82,000 feet. We came up at about 95,000 square feet. That's to accommodate the small school program, gross motor skills space for the little guys so they're not in the gym with the big kids, different dining arrangement, and nursing stations, those type of things to accommodate the entire age span. When we look at that program, you have 1 building that works. It's Huntington. That's your biggest building. It's the only one that really does work in that program. When we look at 525 students, OSCGR is at about 82,000. We're about 95. It's wrong one again. 62 to 74, sorry. And here you've got 2 buildings that work for 525 students. So this is information we've gone through before with you to say essentially what you have here is a starting point that doesn't lend itself well to renovating. It lends itself more to reutilizing the sites trying to move our schools closer to our population centers. So this is the population center map that Jim showed you before, and the location of schools that would serve that best, with Moriarty up at the upper right, and then down into reusing the Golden School, or the Golden Street site, the old Greenville School. And then in a 4-school operation, it would be Uncas and Stanton. In a 3-school, it would be Stanton. And that's, the area is picked mostly for the amount of space that the sites give us and the ability to pick up as many of the students with the shortest bus rides as we can get. And that would be without the student populations over for 3 schools, and you see more centralized around the core of the population. And for 4 schools, simply adds Uncas back on. So we quick study through some of the sites and looking at geological and physical encroachments on Moriarty, a little bit of slope across the site, and a wetland off to the west. And to build a new building on there, we're suggesting consideration of the existing wall field and then replacing that with a northeast facing wall field and a new rectangular field. And actually makes a more efficient use of the site by building a new building, plus it gives you swing space right on that site. Stanton has the same issues. We have a bunch of slope off to the east, the right side of the image, and that piped stream to the left side of the image. The green is a wetland area as designated, and the blue is a floodplain, but we know that it is piped adequately and has not exhibited flooding. And here we're suggesting to consider building on that slope behind the existing building, which would let that building continue to run while the new one is being built, and then take that building down once it's either finished its use or goes and becomes swing space and moves on. And then Uncas, for a 4-school option, has quite a bit of slope on the south and west side, but is very far up in the site, very difficult to navigate traffic-wise. Suggestion is to build behind it and then take that building down and open up a drop-off and parking area that would actually make that site far more functional for us and allow you to have a little bit more separation across the private cars there. And then finally, Golden Street, the former Greenville School. This is a challenging site for grade, but it's a very desirable site for location. So it's a site that we think would merit the increased cost that we would expect from developing on that site. May end up with a building really designed just to suit that site, but that is what we're trying for anyway. To get the best educational opportunity here, looking at building on the slope, flattening out a couple of areas for fields, and then parking might be in where the old footprint of the old building was. Now, these are all proof of concept. Doesn't mean that this is the only way to use the site. It's if we couldn't find a way to make it reasonable, we would report out, as we did with some of the other sites 2 meetings ago, that there doesn't appear to be much feasibility. But in these 4 sites, we think that these are going to be key moving forward and taking some buildings offline. So we talked about buildings and we talked about projected costs and schedule. So in terms of the 3 versus 4, I think it's fair to say, and Mark can jump in here, that I don't know that at this point you would see much difference in those 2. So it would come down to following through on the committee's recommendation of on their preference. So if you want to talk on that one, Mark.
No, we analyzed both the 3 and 4 school programs. Obviously, building less buildings is going to be slightly cheaper, but those buildings are going to be larger. The sites on those particular projects would be larger, though there is some cost savings in not developing 4 individual sites. You're developing 3 larger sites. So the overall impact, I think, on the program is a fairly insignificant amount. Looking at the total value of the project, we're probably looking at maybe 2 to 3%, I think, overall. But we think that the 4-school option may work best for the program. So
So then we're into pricing, and Mark will walk us through this, but it's in here we're anticipating a realistic amount on the grant at this point. And I say that because the grant reimbursements are predicated on whether you renovate or build new. And building new is about a 9 and something % less of a grant. And if you build to the OSCGR program, you maximize that grant amount. So we're talking about a slightly bigger program than that. And we're talking about just using a new construction grant amount. So there are legislative actions that can be taken that can address both of those. But this is probably a worst case scenario, way to put it.
Right. So we did again, separate estimates for each of the school buildings based on new construction for Golden Street, and I'll start off with Golden Street Elementary first. The top number there, the $60,368,000, is the estimated project cost. So that's the total all-in number for that particular project. And then we started breaking down on the portions of the building that are actually eligible for reimbursement. There is a reimbursement reduction because of what Greg had mentioned earlier, that the buildings are slightly larger than OCGR standards, square foot standards. So we did take a reduction there. And for Golden and Stanton will be the same thing, but for new construction, the reimbursement rate is 10%. I'm sorry, it's 10% less than a renovated new project. So we're carrying 67.14% as a reimbursement rate. So the net cost to the city of Norwich is $23,768,920. For Golden Street.
One quick question. Cost, my, experience of a renovated new project will tend to run more in the long run as far as cost goes. Am I wrong in saying that?
You're probably right, especially given where you're starting from.
Yeah.
And that's the incentive.
Yeah, you're the architect.
The incentive for the increase grant
Reimbursement.
is to encourage buildings to be reused, or on the other side of that, develop a plan for what you're going to do with the buildings you don't reuse. So it's a push in a couple of different directions. But I think given where you were starting from on all of these buildings, except perhaps teachers, I think you would end up.
Now, teachers, we're talking about a renovated new project, though.
At this point, we are, although I think that there's some stuff to talk about there, the size of the classrooms, and there's two things that hold you back on that building. One is code for vertical circulation. There's not a single staircase or elevator in the building that meets permit code. It doesn't need to because it's grandfathered in because of the way it's built. But if you renovate to new, you need to increase the width and decrease the rise of all the stair towers in the building. And you need to get a compliant elevator in, and you need two because of the way the gyms are aligned. So this number here is a renovate to new. The $99 million is to renovate to new. I would think that as you start to approach that building, you start looking at should you replace it, and that number would probably work for that building.
Question about the numbers. So they said at Golden Street School, we have the $60 million. Now that's construction cost, project management, A&E design.
That's correct. That's the overall project cost.
That's out the door.
Yes, correct.
I have one quick question. So just spitball, what percentage more expensive is a renovate as new compared to new construction? So like what's the square foot cost comparison in the new construction compared to renovate as new? And just get me in the ballpark.
Let me see, because we did look at Moriarty and Uncas as renovated as new versus new construction, which is not up on the screen here. Let's see, I think I have done that. So if we want to look to the next screen there. So we looked at Moriarty as a new school at 20, let's say, I'm going to use the gross value of the overall project cost. So at $64,204,000, the renovation, Moriarty was roughly 64,128,000. So it's very, very close to being the same value. Again, with Moriarty, there was additions as part of that program. So that does skew the number slightly where you are building new as part of that project.
So.
And Uncas was actually the same.
1-to-1, they're pretty close to being the same, but if we were to renovate it, staying with Moriarty, if we were to renovate it as new, it would also need an addition because you showed it needed a bigger cafeteria, it needed a gym,
Correct.
Right? So, and those are all, that's going to scale up the cost.
Correct, and that's why you get a little bit more parity between the two costs of renovators. Typically, renovators new is less expensive than new construction, but in this particular case, you do have that addition portion, right? That new construction portion of the overall project, which
Would you say?
It'd be a different reimbursement rate.
Just a spitball number, 15% more expensive? Moriarty, renovate as new with the additional spaces it needs compared to Moriarty brand new building where the ballpark is right now. Would that be maybe more, 15% more expensive?
again, Greg, I think the square foot, the way we had estimated, it came out very close to one another, that particular project.
Okay.
Again, because of the size of the additions that were being,
I think it's
added to
fair
the
to
project.
say that where the cost you don't see, because we're talking about construction, is if you renovate, you need swing space. And once you move the kids out of there, you're taking them all over the district. It's the biggest building you're running. And so you don't have a place to put 400 kids, so you're splitting that cohort probably in thirds and moving them elsewhere around the district. So that's another thing that militates against renovating to new and in occupied buildings.
And you still have 50-year-old pipes, 50-year-old wiring in the walls.
If you renovate as new, no.
You replaced all that.
You have to replace
We
all of that.
replace all that.
And that becomes,
Kelly, we redid everything to the walls.
that becomes the question when you go to renovate as new with older buildings, especially the baby boom buildings. The structure and core of those leaves precious little to save when you go into renovate to new. You're essentially doing a core and shell and then everything else you're building. So I think the idea of looking at any of those to renovate as new and expand, there's no building in the district that really lends itself to it. It also addresses the issue of location. There's nothing that hits the trifecta of location, good bones, and big enough site. I think we all kind of keep falling back to just simplify the logistics, build new, close a building.
Well, the reason the renovate is new is almost the same cost as you're talking the internals, the heating, the plumbing, the wiring, the externals, the doors, the windows, the hardware. So essentially the only thing you're left with is concrete block and a roofing system.
Not even
Well,
that,
and
you're
often-
replacing the roof too.
Yeah.
Often relative to the structure that's left, there's additional work that has to be done to bring it to code standard relative to seismic reinforcement and other code requirements.
Now, again, looking at the numbers though, and just want to point this one thing out, is that this is based on the overall construction cost, right? The project cost. And there is reimbursement differences between renovated new and new construction. So it is something that ultimately may be less expensive for the city, but I think with a little bit of politicking, I think the state would probably bend towards giving you the higher reimbursement rate based on the condition of the schools and building new. So,
To me, like you consider Stanton, which is a great school because of the people in it, right? Okay, but the building itself, to renovate as new would be literally to tear it down to the steel and rebuild it, right? So why do that? Right? What's the strong argument for doing that versus building a whole new building?
And plus, I think too, well, quite honestly, that if you build all new, I mean, in one of the goals that we had here, I think, was parity. So obviously we'd be having 4 new, essentially identical school buildings. So it doesn't get any fairer than that, you know, so, and honestly, the one thing that, and you know this from our conversations, that kind of, you know, I hesitate to use the word terrified, but, you know, it almost fits here, but the logistics of this whole thing, you know, and Greg brought that up, and I always figured, you know, hey, we're going to need to build something new. Just to deal with the logistics. I always thought that. So, but the fact of the matter, when I saw the stuff on Stanton, I'm saying there's no way we can really realistically renovate it and expand it. And these other schools, part of the problem is the infrastructure in the school itself, as far as the layout and in the other things like gymnasium, cafeteria, stuff like that. We still have so much multi-use space that in order to get something there, I think, you know, in the long run, I think we're just, you know, we're better off considering the new option and trying to increase our reimbursement rate.
And let's not forget that a third of Stanton, just to stay on Stanton for a moment, a third of it's modular.
Right.
Right. You know, so it's not even building, it's trailers, right?
Mark, over 50 years, the educational purposes have changed. I mean, the building, we're working with buildings now that don't meet our current educational purposes. We have approximately a 20% population of sped, and without those spaces were non-existent when the buildings were built. I mean, you have multiple different purposes now that did not exist 50, 60 years ago.
I mean, and I've talked about this before, and I'll say it again for purposes here. When I started this, we had conversations regarding what the future of education would look like, you know, 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now. Because I was thinking, hey, you know, we're going to do, you know, a lot of online learning and stuff. Maybe bricks and mortar won't be that important. Well, I think one thing COVID did show us was that bricks and mortar are important. Socialization is important. You know, teachers in a classroom are important. You know, so those things, those are the things that are really gonna fly. So, I mean, I would rather do it as inexpensively as we could. You know, if we could get away with it, but unfortunately, you know, I think we honestly need we need buildings, we need teachers and classrooms. Do the job. Peter?
Well, one item on reinforcement reduction. Our data is new. The number you gave, would that be similar numbers? That's 20% of the cost, knowledge.
Yes, because I think you have additions in there, so you are increasing the square foot of the overall building, and that's where you're taking the hit from the state.
Yeah, because with Kelly, when we built another wing here, that was at a different rate.
That's what frequently happens with renovated.
But we also got some help from the state legislature when we, you know, to be honest with you. So we made out just fine by the time we were done. And we do have some ins there, I think. So we do have some support in the legislature. So we have those possibilities.
You also have the fortunate standing of not being the first urban district to go at all their schools. Mm-hmm. So there's precedents within the state for other urban districts that have moved forward. And it gives you a lot to point to say we learned from that program and we learned from this program. And part of that is recognize that a magnet school program isn't necessarily working for you guys, or is it really feasible? Reusing old buildings isn't really feasible. Those are the things that the legislature likes to hear, that you've done some research, you've looked at what you have, and you're making this with your eyes wide open. And I think part of what does that for eyes wide open is that number right there. The total project cost is $381, and the projected cost at the lower reimbursement rate and at schools built to a program that we think really works with the district, not the OSCGR program, is $150 million. And if we cast back a few slides ago, we were talking $195 million, including this building, or $160 without this building. So you're $11 million higher than this project that would give you all new buildings. And I think that's the thing to hammer home.
And that's paying all of the freight ourselves, essentially, or pretty much.
Yeah.
But that's the big
Yeah, and the problem with trying to bond maintenance work is going to cost you more because you're not bonding it all at the same time, and you're not bonding it for a better end product, bonding it for a brand new home. And so that when you go to bond on that type of stuff, you start to battle a little bit more on with your bonding agents and the cost of bonding. Whereas going out for new buildings with state participation will generally get you more favorable bonding. So,
I'm gonna ask this builder. 198. That internally in Norwich, we're,
190,
well, 198, but whatever number is for relative to maintenance.
Oh, that.
20-year maintenance number.
no, there's no capital plan right now like that that'll cover that, no way.
So
So,
it's not even under anybody's.
no, I will tell you, this is not, I mean, little history lesson, all right? This is not something we've taken up, willy-nilly in the last 6 months. This started with 2015, I think, something like that. So with the first iteration of the School Facilities Review Committee that granted did not work out so well. But then the second iteration, which Alderman Stacey Gould, Joe, you were there. Obviously, we came up with, a concept at least that we thought, based on our review of the current data without a budget, for an architect or anything like that, could we make something work maybe on the sites? And I think if you look at it, the work we did within that committee was really based more on the sites than anything else, and what we thought, would fit on, on there. So we were thinking the expansion of those schools and whatever. But then, obviously we didn't have a partner like DRA to come in and help work with us as far as review the actual buildings and that. So that fell to the creation of the school building committee that the city council so graciously did. And then, and it brings us to here, which, we've spent quite a while trying to, figure all this out over the last couple of years. COVID obviously had a huge impact for us, in a lot of ways. But we're here at this point, and I hope we can cross the finish line and we can get the word out that people are, that basically, if we do something else, we're probably going to be, penny wise and pound foolish, because we're just going to be paying some big dollars out of our own pockets down the road and not get any improvement in the system. So this kind of project will, I'm not saying it's going to pay for itself, because it won't, but because it's going to cost money. I'd be lying to you if I said anything else. But certainly the school system will, I think, administratively will be able to function better. The children will more than likely have shorter bus rides. Other things like that, and we'll achieve some level of parity in the K through 5 system, the pre-K through 5 system. So, and we'll have the spaces we need. So,
because it just was through that work that we all did, was before we spent tens upon tens upon tens upon now over
and we've
$100
already
million,
started,
right, to maintain the status quo.
Yep.
What else could we do?
Yeah, that's what that's really what I'm afraid of. So we're just not, set up to really kind of deal with that.
So, by your analysis, I have these two numbers correct. 198 million, non-escalating.
So chances are it would be higher than that. Then
It will be.
because I think you talked about 8%. You figured into these estimates here for the building project. So you hadn't done that with the estimates for maintenance.
That largely would be a cost. 149 million is an escalating cost. Completion.
But that's the portion that we'd have to pay. We would also have to pay that. But then we would have a new school system.
Point being, that unescalated number, just that you need to be well prepared. That's 100. Versus 149 on paper.
and even if you were to take Kelly out of it, take this building out of it because.
Yeah, because he had Kelly in there at the 20 years.
Stretches out 20 years.
Yeah, and the 198 number had Kelly.
Because by that time it'd be 20, 25 years old, and it would need renovation.
So, yeah, so 160 million is everything except this building, over 20 years.
Okay. 160 million versus 140 million.
And that sounds, may sound astronomical, but you're talking about 11 something buildings.
If I could interrupt for a moment, Bob Sapinski, you've got your hand raised on Zoom.
Yeah, just one general comment. I've been with the school system for 15 months now, and in that short time related to maintenance or real serious issues, we've had to replace the Stanton boilers. The parking lot in Stanton was 2 years away from collapsing. We're now replacing the boilers at Teachers. We have roof issues. There's no room at Teachers. The assistant superintendent is constantly looking for space, and it seems every week or every month there's another major maintenance issue just waiting to happen. So I mean, it's just, and Matt Brown can comment on that too, because he sees it every day too. We both end up going around and having to deal with these issues. The elevator at Bishop's failed. We're spending $125,000 to fix that, and these are big ticket items, and they just keep happening. And I'm afraid they're going to get worse and worse as each month goes by.
I think we can probably count on that. So, anyone have anything, Mark Poulos?
I think to sell the plan, we would need an escalated number on the 198 million. You know, so that we're comparing apples to apples. You know, so it'd be like 150 million against 220 or 215, whatever it comes out to be.
High schools.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah, whatever it is,
Because we're not talking about doing anything with Kelly at this time. So.
right. Yeah, so just go to the 165 million.
All right, Stacy?
Well, I think what it comes down to is $165 million over whatever that projection was, 20 years, to repair schools that don't meet our needs. Or we spend $149 million to build schools that will meet our needs for the next 20, 30 years. I really think that's the apple to apple. No disrespect,
Yeah, no,
but that's the apple
absolutely.
to apple. Do we want to spend $165 million to fix just a problem? We're putting a Band-Aid over here, we're putting something new over here, or do we want to spend $149 million, got 4 brand new schools?
Yep. Absolutely.
Well, it's like a decision, do you spend money on a new transmission for a 20-year-old car, or do you go out and buy a new car?
I just sold mine.
Because you make
I finally
that
sold the old
decision.
one, the old convertible.
Is that money I'm gonna sink into an old car, and I'm still gonna have an old car?
Right, and now you need tires, and now you need this,
Right.
and now
Yeah.
you need that.
It's a good
So
enough.
we're spending $165 million
We're still going to have 7
Band-Aid
schools.
a problem. $149 million, we fixed all the problems because we have brand new schools that meet the needs of our children going forward for a long time, long after we're gone.
Yeah.
Right. With the car analogy, I always like that one, but you have to say it's not only a matter of changing the transmission in the old car, it's also you got a new job and you have to travel further, because that's the difference with education. You're fixing buildings that were built for the baby boom, and you're trying to teach the 21st century in a baby boom. That's why the other mashup that you can do with this is to take the program that's developed for the new school and overlay it on the programs for the existing schools, which is what we did in the background. We didn't do it as part of the report, and none of them really fit. You probably remember the graphs that I forwarded you with about 3 meetings ago, where they were almost all red, and that was room sizes that didn't match what you need based on what you own already. So they'll be in the final report, and if you have enough time and nothing else to do, you can go through and say that nothing that you own really works for what you want to be doing for a program going forward.
I'm
So,
driving a Volvo and I have 6 children, I'm driving a Volkswagen and I have 6 children and I can't get them all in my clown car.
A bug, you got a bug.
Bug.
Yeah. Sorry.
But
A Passat, you might be able to fit them.
I do like the car analogy though, because currently, we're gas-powered vehicles. In 20 years, we're probably going to be mostly electric. So are you going to keep your gas-powered vehicle when there are no gas stations? You have to have gas specially made and delivered so that you can run your car. I can, I'm old enough, I can remember the switch from leaded gas to unleaded. And you actually have to throw an additive into the gas tank every time you filled up. Otherwise, the valve
seals would give out.
Right. So that was an extra cost. So that was impetus to get rid of all the old cars that ran on leaded gas.
Anyone else?
Yeah, yes. We're looking at $149 million. It obviously has to go voted on, or the city council, and all that. I see a number, I agree with the concept, 100% it's needed. But I look at it, if it goes to referendum, what is it gonna cost taxpayer?
Yeah, that's something the city council will have to.
I'm just saying, how do you count, because it all comes down, everyone agrees, new car is great, and I agree 100% with the concept. But what's it gonna cost?
Yeah, I know Josh has the numbers at this point, the base numbers that that we got a couple weeks ago, the controller. So they're hashing that out. That's going to be a city council decision. Stacy and Joe could probably speak to that.
I don't think we have the number yet from Josh.
No,
Yeah.
we don't.
About what,
We don't.
it's gonna cost the average taxpayer X amount of dollars per year. Yeah, I don't.
Because the comptroller's office will also look at
Plus it'll be
what debt
staggered. a little
services,
bit.
what debt service that we currently have in the city, right?
Right.
It's coming off as new debt service would come on because there's trade-offs there over the course of a 20-year arc, right? So there's the taxpayer is impacted by that, so it's not just, this is definitely going to cost every household $100 more a year. Well, that may not be the case because if 20 million of debt service comes off, 20 million in new debt service comes on, then there's actually no impact to the taxpayer, in terms of increase.
So that would be,
So that's,
I'm sure there'll be an
comptroller
impact.
would do all of that analysis for us, yes.
there's another thing to think about that when we start to look at schedule. If you build in a unified program that this schedule shows, you're bonding in a very finite amount of time. And once you start bonding, then you start paying it. When you do it as capital improvement and if you were to break that down into bonds spaced every 5 years, you'll end up with bonds stacked on top of one another that will exceed what you would have here in a 1 or 2 bond issue for a 7-year build program. So that's another thing your bond council needs to start looking at, or city council needs to look at is a dispersed or scattered number of bond sales to catch up with CIP, catch up with capital improvement, as opposed to a limited number, 1, perhaps 2 bond referenda to do all of the buildings in a single. It's probably a little bit easier on the financial planning side. We did look at. Let me just get to
hang on. I'm going to come right back. I just want to say that we'll get to more of this in discussion.
Yeah.
All right. So I just want to let Greg finish up and go to questions and answers.
Yeah, we're pretty close to the end.
Yep.
Schedule-wise, we looked at 4 schools versus 3 to see if there'd be any difference in it. 4 schools, 7 years to build out, finish up around 09, and this could slide a bit if it needed to. 3 schools, the only thing that happens is you take another school offline sooner. And you're not necessarily avoiding costs with that unless you sell or get rid of that building or take it down. If you have a building standing, you need to have at least some cost budgeted to take care of it. And then the wrap-up is pretty simple. It's what we've been talking about now. The do-nothing option, 7 elementary schools, 2 middle schools. Educationally, it's not going where you want to go. It's about 160 million. We don't think any of those projects will qualify for renovation grants. You'd be carrying all of it. And you don't have to work at Kelly in this one. And then the new build options, be it 4 or 3, estimated about $150 million. All the projects qualify for construction grants. And once again, work at Kelly is not included. So that's the real apples to apples discussion at the end. It's about a $10 million swing between the two for a truly forward-looking group of buildings, and the discussion of parity at the elementary school level is done at that point with that approach.
Thank you, Greg.
So I will stop sharing, Mark, or do you think people are going to want to go back?
No, well, yeah, you can just leave it out. I should just leave it up for now. But I don't think we're hurting anything. So no, hang on. We're going to do the questions and answers public and stuff. And if anyone from the public wants to ask any questions or comment or whatever, if you want to raise your hand and be recognized or do anything or say anything. Robert Bell?
Yes, thank you. More comment. I'm Robert Bell, by the way. I like our new build options, and I really appreciate that you guys are focusing also on a new Greenville school. And you being centrally located, you guys have said it's in a higher concentrate of enrollment. I think that there's a large opportunity for cost savings as well, as far as the busing in that area as well. And, and maybe possibly there's even some more grants that could be available from the state through further legislation in Hartford. I think this is a great plan, and I appreciate the work that you guys have been putting into it.
So, anyone else? All right. So we'll go to the next stuff, discussion and action on the master plan. So, Mark, you had your hand up before, so.
All right, well, I just want to point out the apples to apples, or what we're going to be putting before the taxpayer. It's not the 149 million, it's the 381 million. That's the tougher hill to climb, because we have to bond the entire project cost and then seek reimbursement. So it's not. So imagine you're a taxpayer and you're looking at a bond issue for even if you do it in two, $190 million, and then we're going to say in another 5 to 7 years, we're going to put out another $190 million bond. So you have to bond the entire project cost and then seek your reimbursement, because you don't get the reimbursement till your building is built and it's certified.
Yeah, well, on the referendum, it would give the entire project cost. It will say the 381 million on the referendum. So we got to make sure that that's.
Yeah, but that's the reimbursement doesn't work like that anymore. It used to. No, it is. You are paid as you go.
Okay, so they do it in tranches.
So you have to obligate the city through the entire amount. So your bonding referendum is for the entire amount, and then what the state is doing is paying their obligation, their share of that. Pretty much, you can get it to monthly payments or every other month. That's part of the running of it all. But yes, you do not have
so
to.
As long as you're making progress, there's no benchmark that you have to meet to get that payment.
Until the final 5% and 11.
Oh,
Say again? 11%. It's 11% now. Hold back.
Well, that's a lot better news than to the taxpayer, and that's an easier sell for this gigantic bond issue, which we're going to have to, even if it's in two pieces. I mean,
it's still big. So
still huge.
So I'm not going to pretend it isn't. I know I read some of the comments online and in the newspaper and stuff, and I thought, and part of the problem is I don't, and we've tried to be as public as we can about this. I mean, we've published this, we, put out stuff to the parents and the school. I think they've done a much better job doing that this time out, and we're still not getting much participation, unfortunately. So I'll thank Claire Bissett today. Thanks, Claire. Thanks for being here. And our other local paper isn't here, obviously. So anyway.
Well, Bill Kenny's here.
No. Volunteers.
Volunteer.
I love it. All right. But I did want to say that this is a process, like I said, that started in 2015. The second iteration of the facilities committee, we came up with that project, and then we came to the school building committee. So this is not something that has happened overnight. It's certainly something that we've examined in great detail, beat the living death out of it, to be honest with you. And it's not all, let's face it, we have on this committee, we have Republicans, we have Democrats, and whatever, but the numbers speak for themselves, I think, for this whole thing. So I'm gonna look for a motion to make the recommend to adopt the master plan as presented here, and I'll look for that motion, and then we'll go on with discussion. So Joe DeLucia makes the motion.
I'll second it.
Second by Stacy Gould. The four school plus teachers. What we have here.
So that's the slide before the master build.
Yeah. The teachers would be renovated as new.
Renovated.
With probably a small addition.
And if I can speak, which I'm not supposed to under Robert's rules, is
I'll recognize you anyway. How's that? As long as no one objects.
Bear in mind, you're adopting a master plan.
Right.
So you're setting a direction.
Right.
Your next step is to study. Once you get past it and everybody says go, you study the buildings, you study the steps, and it may be that teachers comes back and says, it would just be more cost effective and educationally beneficial to replace it. You're not obligated under a master plan to go in any particular direction, except for 4 schools, 4 elementary schools, 2 middle schools. That's the master plan.
Everyone clear on that?
And we're not
Christine,
obligated
thank
to 525 for each school, depending on if we suddenly have a giant population jump.
That's why when we started this, we wanted to know what you had done educationally. What was you doing educationally, programming wise? Because you want the master plan to get you there. That's the basis for the master plan. All the buildings are frou-frou if you don't get the education right.
All right. Any other discussion on the plan? No other discussion. I know we talked enough about it. So. All right, we'll call the vote. Roll call vote again. Christine DeStasio.
I'm all for it, yes.
Thank you. Joe DeLucia.
Yes.
Steve Gauthier. Mark Kulos.
Yes.
Cindy Beauregard. Stacy Gould.
Yes.
Greg Palazzi.
Yes.
Greg Caravan. Yes. Mark Betancourt is a yes. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everybody. So the yeah. Well, I will tell you my goal with these things, as most of you know, is to really develop some kind of consensus. And certainly I think, we've done that here. So we've had some success. So discussion and action. Regarding a report to the council, I guess basically we're going to ask DRA to present on the 5th. I think that's the game plan right now.
Well, the mayor's here, and I'd like to ask him to join the conversation about scheduling that, because we've got a lot going on.
We got a lot on the
Yeah,
5th.
not just on the 5th, we got a lot coming up, so how does this all dovetail together?
Come on, grab a seat.
I will start off just by saying that I would like to see the council, because this is going to involve bond council and an ordinance, right? So with public hearings, Mayor, right? I'd like to see us at the point where we're having our first reading and public hearing no later than the first meeting in August. right? When that makes sense.
Has to, because second meeting in August is the only shot we have to pass now without changing the structure of the ordinance. So it's consistent when the bond council verifies all the language at the end. It has to be then in the hands of the Secretary of State by September 1. So you don't get on the ballot. They need that 2-month window. Further down the road, you then be, if it passes, then the state school construction grant program will look for that 2-year window, that passage, and then you get us scheduled in the window of funding. I believe they still require the 2-year lag between the referendum passage, or has that changed?
That's changed.
It has changed.
If you have your local funding, you can make an application, and you would come up with, at the next June, so you'd have to have your money in hand, and make your application to them. In November, they'll set their priority list, and they'll vote on the money for that. As long as you have a application in and they have assigned it a project number, you can start on the design in anticipation of that. So they've shortened up that window at the beginning.
That's helpful. That delay always costs more money.
So I'll ask both of you, since I got the mayor and the president pro tem here. So are we talking about, say, when are we talking about making a presentation to the council?
Well, let's work it backwards. The 15th is the second meeting of the council. The 15th of August, thank you, right? August 1st is the first meeting of the council in August. Our second meeting is in July is the 18th. Our first meeting is Monday the 5th, and Monday, guys.
Tuesday.
Tuesday the 5th, I'm sorry, thank you, yeah, Tuesday the 5th.
Question,
I'm selling grinders Monday.
the question will be, can bond council have reviewed the language sufficiently enough to approve it, to go in its form? That we follow that August schedule, first read, first post, and then the meeting, second meeting in August. That's really the window. That's to be met, bond council's approval of the language.
True. I'm just, for the purpose of the committee, though, I'm just talking about making an appearance before the council and fulfilling the obligation under the resolution.
Right, I'm trying to work the schedule backwards. As I mean, I would hate to have to do this. But we could have, if we really got pushed up against the wall, we could have a special meeting on the 22nd, right?
That's available. Certainly work with them.
So just with that in mind, so presenting to the council, that's
the question.
right. So that would be an informational prior to the council.
To do that, if you got a busy agenda.
I would start it earlier than
Yeah.
the meeting itself. We've started to do that, and that works out better.
6:30.
Or even 6 if you need it.
What do you think?
I
Rick?
wouldn't want to short the presentation. A lot of information there.
Yeah, this is on the best of nights. This is taking us about 58 minutes.
So let's call, say 6 o'clock
6.
on the 5th. Will that work for you, Greg? Okay. City Hall.
You're saying next week for the presentation? And that's not having the ordinance language before us.
No, we don't need that. That's just a report.
I see no reason to delay it.
Yeah, that's just a presentation from the committee. DRA.
That's not final report.
Well, when do you have the final report ready for present?
Probably right after that.
Huh?
Probably right after that.
Okay, I mean, that can just be forward. That's the written report. I'm not.
What impact do you think July 4th weekend has on attendance on Tuesday night?
I don't know.
People have traveled, people are away for the whole week. You can always find an excuse.
You do it, we could do it the next meeting if you want. I'm open.
You've lost 2 weeks now. So long as you have the bond council.
Yeah, so we have Josh has the numbers. Yeah, Josh has the numbers from a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
So, you can give him updated numbers, whatever. And, whatever he needs
The
to.
bond council begin now.
Yeah,
They don't have to wait till the
correct,
presentation to the public.
right.
So We did wait till the 18th of July for the presentation. Bond council still is going forward with preparing the language, running it by Driscoll, which they always do, and so forth. Yeah.
In terms of the resolution that had the June 30th date deadline on it, I believe that what we're seeing here, this master plan, satisfies that resolution. I think that's, well, I know that was what I had envisioned. I think that meets the expectation of the council that this would
Done.
be, right, that this would be the presentation to say,
Their action tonight, wasn't it?
Yeah, I just, for the sake of the public and stuff, because we obviously don't have too many people here, the more we can get out in public to talk about it, I think the better, so.
and the council meeting broadcast.
Right.
Too, so.
There's a public hearing, you have what, 2 required public hearings? Did those have to be
One.
squeezed?
One, first reading and then a public hearing,
Oh, 2 readings.
2 meetings.
Right.
But that has to be squeezed in before the 1st of September also?
Correct.
or-
The final action of the council voting to place it on the ballot
It
must
would be
be.
before September.
A public hearing would have to be there too.
We can't vote unless there's.
So you're-
Karen, I don't know.
What the mayor was schedule he was talking about was first reading and the first meeting in August, and then the second reading at the second meeting in August, but if necessary, we could,
Well, why
They
don't
could
we
have a
do the
special
first
meeting.
Reading in the second meeting in July.
if bond council's got it ready or not, that's the question.
Well,
Well,
and we just said that we're potentially pushing back the presentation to the 18th of July. So the presentation would be the first time the council sees it, and then
And then you just-
the ordinance would also be on the agenda that,
Yeah.
First read,
yeah, for first read, you know.
it's a little clunky. As long as the bond council starts working on it, first opportunity, okay, tonight.
That's, talk to Josh and John and.
I know.
Or anybody's gonna.
You'll work it
Bond
out.
Council's on vacation, then they assign another attorney from their firm.
Right, but I'm just saying, it's.
Usually it's Mike. Not Driscoll, the other.
Yeah.
I understand that. I'm just saying.
Oh, yeah, 2 points, okay.
Well, what are you talking about making concessions?
How does the work?
Trying to work out. So we're trying to tie it into, getting the ordinance, prepared and get it, first reading and, public hearing and final action on the ordinance.
That's to be published as well in the newspaper.
Yeah, so it's
So it has
gonna,
to be formatted properly.
yeah,
Start all over.
we're not gonna get a second chance at it.
Informational on the set. Not a lot of time to get the information out. People have a low turnout. For this very important subject matter.
Yeah, but we gotta start somewhere, so.
And I understand that, but I just.
We face that every time we schedule.
And then, because we're gonna deal with this,
I know,
yeah, we're
I
gonna deal with this
understand that. I'm just
again.
saying, I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, no, but what's gonna happen is we're gonna have to deal with this at the public hearing and all that too. So we're gonna have other opportunities to present on the subject matter.
All the information.
Presenting what we saw
Hang
tonight
on,
to the council on, oh, sorry.
I'm, as a person trying to help you line your ducks.
Yep.
Affleck in a row, what I'm trying to understand, well, somebody was talking about cars earlier.
Yeah.
How much information, how many questions will you have adequately be prepared to answer if you do a presentation on the 5th of July? As opposed to a special meeting the following Monday, perhaps even earlier. as the
I
mayor
think
is-
then, I think we'll have more. I think the big question, that would have to be answered by the controller, because we'll have, as far as the finances go, that, I don't know if we'd have that kind of information by the 5th.
Because that's what people are gonna want to know.
I know that, yeah.
So, Gould touched on that very early.
Right.
Let's keep it,
Come down to it.
well, let's keep it in perspective. The presentation that we saw tonight being presented to the council is to inform the council and by proxy, the public of what we have in mind. Public comment would happen at the first public hearing for the ordinance for this project, bonding the 381 and change. Okay, so, because if these folks show up on the 5th at, let's say, 6 and present, they're presenting to the council and the public is free to watch, but there's no Q&A. It's presentation to the council and then the council meeting starts.
Schedule, call it another workshop in between.
Yeah.
Unless the 18th or the 11th.
Unless we did a separate workshop.
Do it on the 11th, invite the public, come in and comment.
Yeah.
Do it, continue that.
I think that's a good
on the
idea.
18th.
I think that would be a good idea.
Yeah. I agree.
I mean, it's not like the project doesn't deserve it, to Stacy's point.
Yeah,
Right?
right.
It's not like this project doesn't deserve.
I think, no, that's, I think that would be a good idea.
I agree.
Good.
But those are the people we need to turn out, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
Are the parents who have children
Right.
who are not even eligible yet for preschool.
There you go. The parents of the 2 and 3 year olds.
20 and 30 years out. But the fact is, those are.
This project will be built out, what, 7 years maybe?
7 years.
7 years, so.
The 3-year-old that's home right now, we want his or her parents coming to hear what's going on.
Majority of people who pay taxes in this city don't have kids going to school. We want them to know. They're gonna either carry the day or end the day.
Yeah, well, I think we gotta talk about,
We've got to get it out
Yeah.
to everybody.
realistically, we have to talk about, what the real numbers are, so. So that's, and I think we touched upon some of that tonight, but, all right, so informational on the 5th, Peter? And then we'll do something, schedule something the next week,
The workshop.
a workshop,
Like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
you'll probably handle
So
that,
the
and-
informational is just going to be for the council,
correct.
with no Q&A.
We can do Q&A if you want. I don't have a problem with it.
Suspend our rules.
Yeah, well, it's not during the meeting. So we can do it.
Yeah, our
Right, but
rules
if you-
don't
but if
speak
you're
to
public
workshops.
Q&A,
They-
I think you may need longer than if you start this at 6, you need 1 hour or 58 minutes to do their presentation. Now you're limiting your Q&A
Yeah.
to 30 minutes. That 30 minutes just for the council, or is that for the public?
Council first, then the public.
But I think if you have 10 people who show up and 10 of those people want 3 minutes each, you're just eating up when you get to your council
That's
meeting.
true.
So,
Doesn't your bylaws give you leeway in that?
They do, but an hour is only an hour long, right?
Well, I think you limit the questions really and rather than comments.
what are you gonna tell the people if everybody gets,
Throw a gavel at them, I don't know. But I'm just.
we're trying to sell this.
I know,
I don't
I
wanna
know.
say
I
to somebody,
think holding the second meeting in between.
We're gonna do a workshop,
In
yeah.
between and vote that to the public 100%. I think the public could still learn a lot if council members are asking questions in that half hour after the hour presentation.
Yep.
The number of members, of council come to this, I don't know who spoke. I was late, I apologize.
Really,
Stuff
I know.
happens.
I think it's fine if the council is asking questions for, and we will limit ourselves to the half an hour. And then the following week, you schedule this at 6 o'clock, they give their presentation again, and now we say, okay, Mr. Jones,
We stay as long as we have to.
we stay as long as we have to answer the questions
And then
without
there's
limiting
the
anybody
actual
to the half
public
an hour
hearing.
window.
The following week, where they get to come back and
Say it again.
ask more questions if they have, and we didn't satisfy them.
That's a more logical approach to this because you're trying to disperse an incredible amount of information to as many people as you can. And so do it with baby steps. Do the council, entice some people to watch, do a workshop the next week, do a council meeting the week after that. And eventually people become more facile with it. It's so much information. I mean, you guys are up on it because we've been talking to you every month.
Right.
Now you've got to do that in 5 months between now and November. Get this out to everybody, right?
The education is still allowed after it's voted.
Yes.
You just can't say, please vote for it.
Can't advocate.
You're not allowed to
Can't
advocate to that level, but you may educate. And that will be our responsibility across the city. I would take it to every school on the education side.
Is the sewer plant project, is that also gonna be a bond issue for this fall?
Majority of that is loans, grants. So I do not believe so. They've not discussed any need for us to bring the question to referendum. Not at this point in time.
But, you know, you don't want two competing giant projects.
No, well, those who really pay attention will understand. We're paying down debt now. We're not accumulating new debt every year with the one we passed last year, that they passed. It's interesting though, it's only 4 million less than 45 than what they're asking on the 149. It's our share. I think you'll find they pay a lot more attention than we give them credit for. We really have to do a great education piece.
All right,
I like
anything?
that plan.
All right, good.
So can we run down those dates just so that we're all on the same page?
Next Monday, 6 o'clock, council informational with a presentation. I'm sorry, Tuesday.
Hey, I'll come in.
Council,
One.
I'm working anyway, so it doesn't matter, but a council informational from 6 to 7 for the Q&A, and then our council meeting will start at 7:30. The following week, 11th, will be a council informational,
Right.
open to the public,
Full presentation again.
and from DAR.
DRA, can you do that,
The rest of
guys?
the night, it's all for the public. We listen. Yeah, and answer questions we can.
Then the following week will be
First,
See
reading.
people show up.
First reading. Oh, I'm sorry. We're gonna have the first reading on the 5th? You said that that was a little chunky, right?
I can't, but the language is written.
Right, so the first reading on the 18th.
On the 18th, and then the following.
If it's ready.
If it's ready, that gives us another council meeting to have for first reading. If we have to go to the second meeting in August, that passage to get, these 3 weeks we're utilizing, to give bond council the time, do the
Work on
draft,
the language.
work it all out. Again,
Sounds like we have a plan in place then.
So it's good. The 5th, you garner interest by
right.
putting it on TV and having people watch, and hopefully
The
you have,
following week, they show up.
you have 200 bodies show up on the 11th.
We should be so lucky.
Yeah, we should be so lucky, yes. So we probably have like 6 people, but we'll try. We're gonna make the effort. Nobody's gonna be able to say that we did not try. So that's for sure. Yeah, bring food, yeah, that's it. Yeah.
And we've got to
I gotta get grinder platters.
And you have a point of contact through the BOE, that you're gonna get this information to whoever disseminates information out to
To
parents,
parents, yes.
that they know about these opportunities.
We know about today too, so. All right, all right, so, I think that about covers everything we have on the agenda, folks. So since as this,
Motion to adjourn.
thank you, as this was a special meeting, motion to adjourn is in order made by Alderwoman Stacy Gould. Second, please.
Second.
Mark Poulos with a second. Roll call vote, Christine DeStazio.
Yes.
Joe DeLucia. Steve Gauthier. Mark Poulos. Cindy Beauregard. Stacy.
Yes.
Greg. Mark, yes. We stand adjourned at 8:01 PM. Thank you very much, everybody. It's been fun.
Good night, everybody.